I would like to call this markup to order and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Somebody want to start the clock. Today, this subcommittee begins the markup of H.R. 702 to adapt to changing crude oil market conditions. This bipartisan bill would put an end to the outdated restrictions on the export of American oil, and I want to thank Mr. Barton for introducing it and for the other members who support it. Allowing oil exports would provide a major boost for jobs and the economy, help keep gasoline affordable, and strengthen our national security. I urge all of my colleagues to support this common sense and long overdue measure. America is a nation that supports free trade and open markets. Millions of Americans, from farmers to automakers, enjoy the benefit of a global marketplace and consumer base. However, Congress created an exception for oil exports back in 1975. At the time, we feared that America was running out of oil, that we would become increasingly dependent on OPEC countries. However, over the years, many of the laws that were enacted during this period of our history have been repealed. Price controls are a good example. However, the restrictions on oil exports remain on the books. Over the last decade, advances in drilling technology have resulted in dramatic production increases. This is especially true of the lighter grades of crude, not suitable for most domestic refiners, but very much in demand around the world. The oil and natural gas sector has been a rare bright spot in the economy and has been one of our best job creators. However, with oil prices at their current low levels, we've seen the pace of new drilling activity drop off, and some of those jobs have been lost. Oil export restrictions magnify the impact of the price decline. Opening up new markets for American oil would create an additional demand and spur increases in oil production. According to the study from IHS, lifting the export ban would create an average of 394,000 additional jobs through 2030, with a peak of 1 million in 2018. These are high-paying jobs that would already be in existence today, except for the ban on oil exports. It is worth noting that these jobs are not concentrated in oil-producing regions, but are spread throughout the country. Many have raised concerns about the impact of oil exports on the price of gasoline. However, a large number of studies have concluded that oil exports would not raise prices at the pump, but may actually lower them as more oil becomes available on the world market. The economic benefits alone should make lifting export restrictions an easy choice, but the energy diplomacy and security benefits are also an example of a valuable benefit. Lifting oil export restrictions would allow the U.S. to help counter the influence of Russia, OPEC, and potentially Iran. And I think it's also ironic that the recent agreement negotiated by the Obama administration, which will allow Iran to start exporting their oil products, while here in the U.S., we're still prevented from doing that. The pro-export consensus is a broad one and includes groups as diverse as the Brookings Institution, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Heritage Foundation. Oil exports also enjoy support from numerous high-ranking Obama and Clinton administration officials, as well as many who served under both of the Bush administrations. For the economic and geopolitical benefits of oil exports, I urge my colleagues to take this long overdue step and support H.R. 702. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time and would like to recognize at this time the ranking member from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for his opening statement.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important markup on this important bill, H.R. 702. Legislation to prohibit restrictions on the export of crude oil, introduced by my good friend and colleague, and I might add, the in some minds, the greatest congressman from Texas, next to Jim Wright.
Next to Jim Wright. What about Sam Rayburn?
Or Sam.
What are you going to ask for?
Well, just hold on now. Don't.
He said Jim Wright and Sam Rayburn.
Right. Don't be too hasty now. We're negotiating, all right? Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that I have spent much time considering in light of the new American energy renaissance and the increased production of both natural gas and shale oil. I believe the time may be right for modifications to our nation's 40-year ban on crude oil exports. Mr. Chairman, as I have stated many times before, I support an all-of-the-above energy policy. In practice, that means I wholeheartedly support President Obama's climate action plan, including the joint announcement with China, establishing ambitious carbon pollution reduction targets, the national commitment to the Green Climate Fund, and of course the President's signature environmental achievement, the Clean Power Plan. Mr. Chairman, I believe each of these initiatives, both individually and collectively, will go a long way in helping to transition not only the U.S., but countries around the globe to more sustainable, cleaner, and greener energy sources. With that said, Mr. Chairman, the reality is that fossil fuels are going to be in the energy mix, both domestically and globally, for the foreseeable future. And it is critically important to my constituents and to the economy as a whole that all segments of the population are able to benefit from the tremendous opportunities available within the oil and gas industries, as well as the alternative energy industry. So, Mr. Chairman, while I'm not able to support H.R. 702 at this very moment, my office has been working with and will continue to work with my friend, the esteemed gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton's office, to see if we can come up with a proposal that I'm comfortable with that would warrant my support for lifting the ban. I think it would be beneficial to have more time, Mr. Chairman, to fully discuss this issue before the full committee. We need more time. Specifically, Mr. Chairman, businesses around the country have repeatedly reached out to my office for help in finding pathways to securing prime contracts and subcontracts within the energy supply chain. We all understand that awarding contracts to minority firms can result in a multiplier effect on jobs and economic opportunities for communities that need assistance the most. Mr. Chairman, before opening the door to this global market, I must feel confident that underrepresented communities all around this country would indeed benefit from the opportunities that will come from lifting this ban. In another way of speaking, Mr. Chairman, cut us in or just cut it out. So, Mr. Chairman, I will remain engaged on this matter, and I will maintain an open door policy for stakeholders who would like to discuss either side and all sides of this particular issue. Hopefully, again, Mr. Chairman, the majority will give us more time to work through these important issues. It is my hope that by the time this bill moves through the full committee, all of my concerns and all the concerns of the members of this subcommittee on this side of the aisle will have been addressed, and we will be able to fully confirm our stance affirmatively on this issue on not affirmatively on this issue. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. At this time, I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, America's energy landscape has certainly changed dramatically since 1975 when President Ford signed the export ban into law. And few back then could have imagined that we'd have a domestic oil glut jeopardizing new drilling and the jobs that go with it. But that's the situation that many experts say that we face today. The growing supply of American oil is outpacing domestic demand and, in fact, needs a new outlet. There is widespread support for oil exports. Left-leaning organizations like the Brookings Institution and the Progressive Policy Institute have joined center and right-leaning groups in saying that oil exports would, in fact, create jobs and boost economic growth. CBO, GAO, and most recently the Energy Information Administration have all concluded that oil exports would not raise the price at the pump and may actually save consumers money. And foreign policy experts across the political spectrum have determined that oil exports would enhance America's standing in the world. And I would note that the President's agreement with Iran now allows Iran to export oil as well. So it's important that we pass this legislation through the subcommittee today. I'm glad to say that the chief sponsor of the bill, Mr. Barton, I congratulate his enthusiasm. He said that he would be able to work with both sides, and without his efforts, we would not be here today, and I congratulate his efforts, and I look forward to the vote that we have later this morning as the bill moves through the legislative process, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time, recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Whitfield, and also our ranking member for today's markup. As I've said before, it's not a bad idea to reconsider the merits of a policy enacted in the wake of the 1973 oil embargo. The world is very different than it was 40 years ago. Unfortunately, I believe that the majority has rushed to mark up this legislation, cutting this committee's consideration short. Our energy picture is evolving rapidly. Worldwide crude oil prices are at their lowest level in 5 years. U.S. gas prices have been hovering around $2 per gallon, at least in New Jersey. Domestic oil production has increased dramatically in recent years, while demand has declined thanks to increased fuel efficiency standards for our cars and trucks. And all of this is good news for consumers in the near term. However, there's no guarantee that these conditions will last, so I believe that it's imperative for Congress to consider a host of factors before permanently dismantling our nation's ability to restrict oil exports as proposed by H.R. 702. First, we should consider the impacts on consumers. How would easing restrictions affect the price of crude oil and gasoline? Proponents argue that allowing unrestricted exports of crude oil will lead to low oil prices and a lower price at the pump. But a recent Energy Information Administration study found that changes to U.S. oil export policy will have little to no impact on the future price of oil. What we do know is that changes in our crude oil policy will lead to a significant payday for oil producers, with increases in annual profits approaching $30 billion by 2025. Increased crude exports certainly help oil companies, but do they really benefit the consumer? Next, we should also consider the impacts on our refinery capacity and associated jobs. Refinery capacity is a critical element of our infrastructure and can be an important source of good-paying, middle-class jobs. And both our infrastructure and jobs have grown over the past few years due to increased production. Both would be in jeopardy if we hastily remove crude export restrictions. Like the steelworkers, I want to keep and grow refining jobs here in the United States. Unrestricted exports of crude oil could mean exporting those jobs and losing out on critical investments in future refining capacity. And finally, Mr. Chairman, we must seriously consider the environmental and climate impacts of lifting the export ban. In today's world, we can't consider energy policy as distinct from environmental policy. They are linked, and each is a facet of the other. Increasing crude oil exports means increasing domestic production of crude oil, which has impacts on climate change, on public health and worker safety, on property owners, and on protection of our water supplies. Yet the bill before us prohibits any official of the federal government from imposing or enforcing any restriction on the exports of crude oil in any circumstances, not for reasons of national security, not for adverse consumer impacts, not for public safety, and certainly not for impacts to the environment. And I think this is dangerous and misguided. Too often we eagerly embrace short-term profits and benefits without understanding the costs of our actions. We should not make such a mistake again here. Instead, we should take the long view to ensure we fully understand and consider the enduring consequences of our actions and choose the cleanest and most sustainable path forward. And that's the essence of common sense energy policy. So I don't believe the potential impacts of H.R. 702 on the economy, on consumers, and on the environment can be considered acceptable. Therefore, I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this legislation, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Texas, the primary sponsor of the legislation, Mr. Barton, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and Chairman Upton for scheduling the markup today. I want to thank Ranking Member Rush for his kind comments and open mind. I want to thank Ranking Member Full Committee Pallone for his reasoned thoughts about this issue. This has been a long day coming, Mr. Chairman. In December of 1975, when President Ford signed the bill that restricted exports of crude oil from the United States, we were importing almost 2/3 of our oil. We didn't have the capability to export crude oil. We had just come out of the Arab oil embargo of the early 70s. We thought our oil base was in decline. Mr. Chairman, that's wrong. The United States of America has the largest oil and gas reserve base of any nation in the world, including Russia and Saudi Arabia. Not only that, Mr. Chairman, we have the best technology in the world. And not only that, Mr. Chairman, we have the best workforce in the world, the best group of people that know how to innovate and know how to utilize this resource base. We are the only nation in the world, Mr. Chairman, that has the capability to substantially increase our oil production. The Saudis can't do it, the Russians can't do it, the Iraqis can't do it, the Iranians can't do it, the Mexicans can't do it. No other nation in the world has the capability that the United States of America has to substantially increase our oil production. But in order to do that, Mr. Chairman, we simply must repeal this outdated ban on crude oil exports. The bill before us today would do that. It is a bipartisan bill. We have almost 10% of the Democratic caucus is an original co-sponsor of the bill. That is not happenstance. Henry Cuellar from South Texas, who has the Eagle Ford Shale in his congressional district, has been a tireless worker encouraging Democrats to sign on to the bill. Just this week, the Blue Dog group in the House of Representatives has endorsed the bill. How many bills do we have in this Congress, Mr. Chairman, that the Blue Dogs have endorsed on the Democratic side and the Republican Study Committee has endorsed on the Republican side? Not many. This is a simple issue. We have an abundance of crude oil. Our refineries are running at 97% capacity. 97%. They are not going to lose refinery jobs if we repeal the ban on crude oil exports. They're going to maintain those jobs. This is a bill that will help every state in the union, Mr. Chairman, not just Texas. The state that is second helped, Texas is helped, but so is California, so is Illinois, so is Missouri. You go across the board, every state in the union will create jobs, create economic activity if we pass this legislation. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm very happy that you're going to mark the bill up, and I promise my friends on the Democratic side, and they are my friends, it's going to be an open process, it's going to be a bipartisan process, and ultimately it's going to be a successful process. One of the greatest moments I've had as a congressman, Mr. Chairman, was taking the Energy Conference report for the 2005 Energy Policy Act to the House floor to have John Dingell sign it. I hope that Chairman Upton gets to take a conference report in the next 3 months and ask Mr. Pallone to sign it, and at that time I hope that Frank will sign it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would remind all members also that opening statements will be part of the record, and are there further opening statements at this point? The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding the markup today. Today we have to discuss an issue that's very important to the district I represent. Over my 20 years in Congress, I have at one time represented 5 refineries and still represent many people who work there. But what people forget is Houston isn't the refining capital of the world. We're actually the energy capital of the world. Our district is home to many upstream drillers, midstream transporters, and storage companies as well. All these companies have a stake in the policies we're discussing today. The producers are in the field creating jobs and are directly responsible for the U.S. position as the #1 producer of oil and gas in the world, and Texas has a lot to do with that. The pipeline and storage companies are building like crazy in our district. I visited a facility last year in our district that was completed that will hold 700,000 barrels of oil. Under current law, midstream companies are investing and build splitters to export condensate that's allowed under current law. I know approximately 10 announced projects that are set to come online in the next 2 years. Under current law, our refineries are investing and expanding. There have been 10 other announcements in Gulf and across the country that would add additional capacity. Under current law, we can and are exporting crude oil to Mexico and Canada. All these thanks to the U.S. oil and gas production. Our production has been an enormous boom in the economy of our district, but I also know the upstream folks are facing domestically constrained markets and internationally challenging marketplace. So the U.S. lacks that infrastructure. Infrastructure is needed to move the product from non-traditional drilling areas to where the refining capacities are. North Dakota does not have a pipeline that leaves North Dakota, so everything comes out in either truck or train car. We need to invest in pipeline capacity and hope that it'll address in this energy package. We also need to understand the international marketplace and the complexity of oil as a commodity. I'm going to produce at home and provide for the domestic needs and then supply our friends around the globe. But I don't also want to become just a resource nation and lose these downstream jobs and manufacturing jobs that we have in our refining and even our chemical industry. I remember 2 empty office buildings in the 1970s, and I sure like those chemical and refinery jobs coming into our district instead of leaving it. I'm open to working on the export issue, but we have to create a policy that not only reflects the last 30 years, but also looks into the future for the next 30 years. As we move forward to full committee, I encourage us to sit down and engage in the issue and craft common sense legislation that will not just benefit producers, but benefit everybody along the supply line, including the consumers. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Are there other members on the Republican side that would like to make an opening statement? Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American energy revolution has dramatically improved our energy security at home and overall economic opportunity for hardworking Americans. The U.S. is now the #1 producer of oil and gas in the world. Unfortunately, current policies reflect a 1970s era of scarcity, and these policies desperately need to be updated to reflect our current reality of energy abundance. Several major studies over the past year, including CBO, IHS, Brookings, Columbia University, and the national security experts from both Republican and Democratic administrations, all agree on a key issue. American consumers and households all benefit if we repeal the outdated ban on crude oil exports. President Obama's former top economic advisor, Larry Summers, even agrees that we need to lift this ban. It is also notable that we're considering this bill today as debate on the Iran deal is moving forward. Why are some now so eager to lift Iranian sanctions to allow their oil to access the world market, yet our own domestic producers continue to face internal sanctions? Gasoline prices are set by Brent global prices. Allowing our domestic producers to increase global supply will bring overall energy prices down for hardworking Americans. The administration's own Energy Information Administration stated in a recent report that lifting the crude export ban could reduce gasoline prices. So we talked about the long view here, or you've heard people mention the long view. And you've heard people talk about trying to benefit their communities, particularly those in lower income and lower middle class families. Let's walk through the benefits of this deal. This benefits American consumers by overall lower energy prices for what they buy every day. This helps those families get what they need today for economic security. Number two, it benefits the American energy producer and allows them to further reinvest in our domestic energy structure, furthering our energy security. Number three, it benefits our geopolitical standing and strengthens our ties with global friends and allies and hurts those who are adverse to American interest. And number four, and for those people that care about the downstream energy industry, think about this. This also benefits our downstream refining community because lower prices for their products stimulate volume demand for their products, their refined products. That gives them more financial capital to reinvest in hiring skilled American workers and to reinvesting in their operations. These are four critical reasons where everybody wins out of this, and I think we need to keep these things in mind. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding today's markup, and I hope we have a strong bipartisan vote in favor of Mr. Martin's bill. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The energy landscape in this country and around the world has undeniably changed since we first limited oil exports in 1975. Our energy portfolio has diversified, adding new sources and utilizing new technologies. But while we could talk for days about the change we've seen in the energy sector over the last 4 decades, I think we need to talk about the incredible change we've seen in just the past year. A little over a year ago, in the summer of 2014, West Texas Intermediate crude was trading at over $100 a barrel. Today, it's below $50. Our committee cannot just be reactionary to oil prices. We need to think about the big picture, the next 5, 10, 20, or 50 years. And I think this bill can have some real negative consequences now and in the future. People on this committee know I'm an all-of-the-above guy when it comes to energy, and I've voted in favor of many bills from both sides of the aisle, including dealing with exports. But I have serious concerns about this bill. We've been blessed with an incredible abundance of resources in our country, but we have to make sure we're making smart decisions on how to use them. And although we're very fortunate with these abundant resources, let's not forget that our country is still using much more oil than we're producing. In June of this year, the most recent data we have, the United States used 16.9 million barrels of oil a day, but we only produced 9.3 million barrels. So we talk about energy independence. We're still a long ways from energy independence when we have that kind of a spread. Our top priority as a government needs to be ensuring that America has a strong source of stable energy for years and decades to come, regardless of the political and religious turmoil around the world. If we're going to export oil, we need to do so prudently and ensure that we keep good family-sustaining jobs here at home. I know a lot of hardworking men and women on the other side of my state whose families rely on jobs in the refineries. Lifting the ban could ship their jobs overseas along with our oil. The transportation of oil from the Gulf to U.S. refineries also supports the American shipbuilding industry and steelmaking industry, as well as jobs in the maritime trades. Lifting the ban could destroy a lot of U.S. jobs in those industries too. I think we need to make sure that we do right by hardworking Americans in those jobs as well. So in short, Mr. Chairman, I think this bill needs some work, and I think we need some time to sit down and work on a bill that takes all of these things into consideration before we move forward to the full committee. I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. This time, I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. First of all, this is a good bill, and it will help continue to create jobs or save jobs because obviously in the oil fields right now there's a decline and a loss of job. Illinois has the Illinois Basin. We still are marginal producers, and our producers are asking us to lift this ban. Crude oil is a commodity product, just like corn and beans, and should be sold on the world market. The Brent pricing will be lower based upon new supply that goes in, so the world price of crude oil will go down. And the last thing that I talked about quite a bit in all the hearings was more crude oil on the world market really will help protect our allies and friends from rogue nations that use crude oil to extort public policy in an international arena. And for that reason, I appreciate Chairman Emeritus Barton's bill, and I look forward to supporting it. I yield back my time.
Chairman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Members, as currently crafted, I believe this bill is an unconscionable giveaway to the big oil companies at the expense of American consumers, America's national security interests, and decades of U.S. policy to encourage America's energy independence. You simply cannot ignore the fact that America remains heavily dependent on imports of crude oil, over 25% today. And although proponents argue that a ban is in place, that is not accurate. Current law allows thoughtful and strategic exports to our allies. And in fact, those exports have been increased over the past few years. Regarding consumers, any claims that sending American oil overseas would help consumers are entirely unsupported. Instead, what the studies show is that exporting American oil would feed the uncertainty of oil markets and American consumers. Further, allowing more crude oil exports could result in $8.7 billion less investment in U.S. refining capacity over the next 10 years. Those are American jobs. And CBO estimates that if the restrictions on crude oil exports are lifted, the prices of domestic light crude oil seen by some U.S. crude oil producers and petroleum refiners would rise. When it comes to national security, we've got to be very careful here because export of America's crude oil is rife with unknown and unintended consequences. Who will really benefit? It's likely the Chinese. We are currently locked in a geopolitical struggle with China. China is known for its exploitation of natural resources all across the globe in Africa and South America. Why would we help them gain a strategic foothold on America's natural resources? I think that's should give everyone pause. My overriding concerns are with the American consumers and Americans' national security, and I urge the committee to carefully rethink the policy direction on this bill, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members seeking recognition for an opening statement? Seeing none, the chair would call up H.R. 702 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 702 to adapt to changing crude oil market conditions.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, are there any amendments to the bill? Seeing none, Mr. Barton really did his work. I can see that. The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 702 to the full committee. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.